As we know, Netflix loves to put out loads and loads of slop. There is probably more slop by the minute on Netflix than there is on this channel. But occasionally, very, very rarely, there is a diamond in the rough, a real gem. And today I want to talk in detail about one of my favorite Netflix shows this year, Baby Reindeer. Now, Baby Reindeer was created by the comedian Richard Gadd.
Slept with my sister the other day.
And just to put into perspective how successful Baby Reindeer was, it basically made him a millionaire overnight. Now, this is a limited series, which is big boy words for there will not be a second season. This is a single self-contained story, all within a nice 7-episode bracket, and each episode being around 30 to 40 minutes, which, if anything, is really, really refreshing. I find it so much easier to jump into a limited series myself instead of, like, you know, watching a show and seeing there's like 2,500 seasons. Guys, just watch Suits. I promise it gets better. The scene with the green screen on the rooftop, it only gets better after that, guys, I promise. So Baby Reindeer is a weird story because Richard Gadd is the creator, but he actually plays himself in the show. But in the show, he's renamed himself as Donnie Dunn. Now, Donnie works at a local pub in London. I'm sure you've all seen the famous memes of British men going to the pub. It is a national pastime over here. Is this the one? This is the one. So good, man. It's so good. It's the fact that he actually looks like the North FC meme as well. It's so good. I needed that. Now, even though Donnie is working at the pub, it's only part-time. He's got, you know, higher aspirations. He basically wants to break out into the comedy scene. He wants to do stand-up and make everyone laugh. I know what I'm explaining right now sounds exactly like the premise of Joker. You know, when he does the stand-up scene and everyone laughs, but then in reality, no one is actually laughing. Okay, I understand that some people are going to draw parallels, okay? But I promise you the story is entirely different. Now, in the opening episode, it's basically giving a lot of backstory to Donnie, which is the character that Richard Gadd plays, which, again, he's playing himself, but he's gave himself like a pseudonym, like a different name. It's a little bit weird, but it makes sense later. So you can already tell in the opening that Richard's life is not at its fullest. Currently, he is living with his ex-girlfriend's mom, and outside of some work colleagues that usually make fun of him, he doesn't really have any friends. That is until one day, a woman enters the pub that he's working at. Now, this woman is bigger and not really attractive in the conventional sense, and she takes a seat at the bar on her own and just sits there. And eventually Donnie kind of takes pity on her because she seems, you know, kind of sad, just sat there on her own. She doesn't even want to buy anything because she says herself that she has no money.
Are you sure? Cup of tea?
Can't afford something.
So Donnie basically gives her a cup of tea free of charge, you know, as a nice gesture.
How about I give you a cup of tea on the house?
Now, for Donnie's character, this shows that, you know, he can be a very nice person. All he's done is saw someone that he thought was, you know, pretty down on their luck, pretty depressed, and then offered something, you know, as a nice gesture. Well, that small gesture of kindness is manipulated and twisted throughout the show into something much more malicious, to the point that you're watching Baby Reindeer and you think, oh my God, if only he never offered her that tea, none of this would have happened. So at this point, she starts coming to the pub where Donnie is working pretty much every single day, basically becoming a regular. And Donnie starts talking to her so much that they, you know, become friends, because Donnie doesn't really know anyone else in his life. Like I said, after work, he stays at his ex-girlfriend's mom's house. He even mentions at one point that, you know, her laugh is something that he craved, mostly because he wanted to do a career in stand-up comedy. So by having one person laugh at your jokes, that could be, in your head, an entire audience of people.
I wanted her to laugh. I wanted her to share in the joke, but she just didn't.
And that's one thing I really do like about the show, and I'm going to bring this up a lot, by the way. It doesn't portray characters in a purely evil, vindictive light, or a very good, you know, like high karma light. Richard, for example, you know, took pity on her. That was a really nice gesture, but he's also trying to fulfill himself and fill a hole in his life through this woman that he's met. And the woman, as you'll find out in the show, or if you saw any of the promotional material, is not the best person in the world, but you almost can sympathize with her. Almost. Now, a little bit later down the road, after several visits to the pub, I'm assuming Martha, which is the woman's name, she starts to become very, very clingy with Donnie, to the point that other people are even noticing this, like other co-workers.
Just bought a penthouse. Furnished. All I need now is for someone to hang my curtains.
Hanger curtains. Something about it sounded vaguely sexual.
When are you two gonna shag?
And there's another pivotal point in the show where the co-workers are making fun of Donnie, you know, for being so clingy. And Donnie kind of in the moment, you know, not really knowing how to respond to this social encounter and also thinking, I need to learn how to be a comedian. He makes this gesture to Martha that I'm gonna hang your curtains.
I'll hang your curtains.
Which is obviously the most boomer way of saying I'm gonna have sex with you. Now for Donnie, it was just a spur of the moment. It was a joke. He didn't really think about it. It was a little bit awkward, a little bit cringe, but Martha, being the character that you'll learn about later, takes it very, very literally. Now this is where Martha starts sending Donnie a lot of emails. I'm not talking about like 10 or 20 a day. I'm talking around 100 a day. And throughout the show, these emails get more and more drastic, more and more brutal. The spelling on them especially gets much, much worse. It is insane watching all of it. The episode is only 7 episodes long, but you feel like every single episode is just descending more and more into just complete madness. Now, Donnie and Martha are in a relationship, but it's a non-cooperative relationship because Donnie sees Martha as a friend and nothing more, you know, just someone he can talk to when he's on shift and the pub's completely dead. That's it. But Martha, on the other hand, just wants Donnie all to herself. She sees this as a relationship that he can fulfill. And it's really interesting through the show watching this tango between these two very good actors because Donnie has this growing discomfort throughout the show because he notices that Martha is getting more and more obsessive towards him. And this isn't just her turning up to his work every single day. It becomes madly obsessive. She would attend his comedy shows, find his Facebook, and would also write these, you know, really overly obsessive emails. And also on top of that, in later episodes, she actually forces herself into his innermost circles. Like I said, Donnie does not have a lot of friends, but remember when I mentioned earlier, he still lives with his ex-girlfriend's mom? Martha actually finds a way to worm herself into that household under the guise of it, I think, being like an artist or like a pottery class. You watch this show and you do think after watching each episode, surely it cannot get any worse, right? And it only gets worse, so much worse. Now, like I said, Donnie, Richard Gadd's character, does not see Martha in a sexual way at all. He doesn't even see it as a relationship. He actually starts, you know, going on dates throughout the show, which he's totally allowed to do. Like at one point, he goes on a date with this trans girl called Terry. And Terry in the show is a very interesting angle because Donnie is obviously dating Terry, but Donnie is scared about being open about the relationship because, you know, like he's dating someone who's trans and he thinks that if that, you know, kind of gets out into the public, he's going to be completely disowned by everyone. He basically keeps Terry as this like hidden secret that he has because he's just absolutely ashamed. And then to make matters worse, Martha finds out that Donnie has been dating this girl Terry. I can't even say it on the side because they were, you know, Martha and Donnie were never in a relationship in the first place. Now for the next part of the video, much like how the show does, I'm going to put a little warning here that there's going to be some pretty heavy themes like drug use, sexual assault. This part is pretty heavy. Martha actually assaults Terry, you know, attacking her and saying these like just absolutely horrible statements. And this is only like the midpoint of the series as well. So at the midpoint of Baby Reindeer, it does something interesting. Instead of, you know, looking at this mad descent with Donnie having to deal with Martha becoming more and more obsessed, we take a break. We move completely away from that and actually go into the past a little bit. So this was when Donnie was initially trying to grow his stand-up career and failing miserably, unfortunately. You know, he had some funny bits. Most of them were probably not that funny, which Richard Gadd, who plays the character because he's playing himself, is incredibly self-aware about. Like, for example, how he'd go into pubs and just start doing a stand-up bit, but like no one even cared because they were too busy like watching the football on TV. And this is one thing I love about Baby Reindeer. It features this incredible cast of people and it really does humanize them. So Donnie encounters a character that's never seen before in the entirety of the show called Darian.
I'm Donnie, by the way.
Darian O'Connor.
Now, he meets him at a bar originally, and then he starts coming to his live shows and stuff. And this is basically, I think he's like some kind of creative stage director or, you know, for a TV series. And Donnie almost seems to find Darian as this best friend he never had. He finds it interesting how Darian is just so open about himself, like his sexuality, his drug use, which again is very weird. But I think for Donnie to find someone that was just so candid about everything in his life, he found it very refreshing. Like he could basically be himself around Darian. So eventually Darian has the idea with Donnie. Again, I know their names sound so similar. Okay. Donnie, main character. Darian, not main character. So Darian has this idea of getting Donnie to write scripts and basically a bunch of jokes and stuff and submit them. And he has the idea, Donnie, why don't you come back to my apartment? We can take a bunch of hallucinogenics, you know, get completely high, and that will, you know, let the creative juices flow. So Donnie likes that idea. He goes back with Darian, takes a bunch of drugs, and, you know, the first couple trips, they're good. He does slowly notice that he's been given more drugs to take then Darian, almost like Darian can be in control.
I'll take half of one. You take 1.5. I'll act as your guide so you feel safe.
It's under the premise of being like a trip sitter, you know, someone who's sat there mostly sober to make sure the situation's going okay so people don't just go feral and start killing each other. But then Donnie realizes that Darian has actually been grooming him all along, and during one of the encounters where he's high on drugs, Darian actually rapes him. And Donnie, to be fair, which he said himself in the show, had no good reason to go back. He shouldn't have gone back because the first couple of times, I mean, one trip, for example, he kind of, you know, he freaks out during a trip. He gets like mad paranoia. And he thinks that Darian is trying to like trap him or kill him or something, and he tries to leave the apartment and Darian stops him. After that, you would think, I am never going to go back there again. But he does. He keeps going back because he doesn't want to burn that bridge with Darian, because Darian is someone who is incredibly successful, incredibly rich, incredibly powerful, and he's worried if he burns that bridge, he won't have a career in comedy. And if anything, Darian will probably burn the bridges for him so he can't make any more connections in the future. The reason why this side story with Darian is even mentioned in the show is obviously this is something that did actually happen to Richard Gadd, the creator. There are a lot of real life connotations, which I will get into later, because that's one of the reasons I made this video. But the point that was being made over the Darian side story is Donnie's character. He has this problem where he keeps purposely toxic people in his life for overly long periods of time. Most people would be able to suss out that Martha is, you know, mentally unwell. She's a stalker. She's a bad person. Most people would be able to understand that Darian was just using Donnie. He had many red flags before that sexual encounter.
I could sit in another room and try and...
Do you want to get high?
But still, he kept going back. Now, cutting back to the present, we actually see Martha starting to mess with Donnie's family, doing really weird things like contacting Donnie's parents and basically saying, oh, he's in the hospital, look like he had a life-threatening accident.
Donnie, will you pick up? We've been ringing around every hospital trying to figure out which one you've been taken to, and nobody knows a thing.
Pick up your bastard phone. We're sitting here wondering where the fuck to go. Nobody has any records of you anywhere, or a car crash, or anything we've been told.
This will be the only Breaking Bad reference in the entirety of the video, but that is something that they definitely stole when Hank Schrader got a call about his wife, Marie, to basically get the heat off Walt's back when he was sat inside the RV.
Who's this?
Martha.
There's also a lot of other things that Martha has done throughout the show, which I haven't even gone over. Like, for example, sat outside Donnie's house opposite at a bus stop, just waiting for him. Just sat there, waiting, doing nothing, to the point that she almost like freezes to death, like not even being able to respond because she's so cold.
Are you okay?
And that was also really interesting because it shows that Martha as a character isn't this evil, vindictive woman. You know, she's not the wicked witch of the West like the Wizard of Oz. She's someone who is deeply troubled. She's obviously gone through her own trauma, and unfortunately because of that has found this complete and utter fixation with Donnie. But again, Donnie has done some really stupid things. Like, for example, like I said, when Martha was waiting at the bus stop, Donnie actually takes her back into the house out of sympathy.
I'm going to take you back to yours, okay?
Because again, like I said earlier, Donnie is someone who, to fill this hole in his life almost, keeps purposely toxic people around him, almost as if to make his life interesting. And that's another thing about the show I really love, because obviously Donnie is played by Richard Gadd, the creator of the show, who is playing himself in a semi-dramatized series of events. But even he directly admits that he himself as a character back then was flawed. You know, when he was dating Terry, the trans girl, he didn't want to be public about it because he felt like he'd be, you know, absolutely ousted by everyone. He had this stalker for months, and then Darian as well, even though that was an absolutely horrible experience. He had so many red flags, but he chose to ignore them. Again, obviously not blaming Donnie or Richard Gadd for that in any regard. This is just stuff that he says in the show himself. It's almost like him self-reflecting. The entire Netflix series is basically him turning his trauma into art. But yeah, after Martha starts contacting his parents, he realizes then, and only then, enough's enough. Mostly because I think that bubble got burst. Everything that was included around him, like the sex and, you know, the text and stuff, he could keep that within his world. But once it hit his parents, that was almost like kind of a sobering wake-up call. So then he goes to the police. And when Donnie goes to the police, this is during his comedy finals, because obviously, like I've said many times, he's someone that wants to get into stand-up comedy. And he's basically been doing this competition to see if he can kind of like graduate comedy school, I guess. But obviously now he's under so much pressure because, you know, everything he's gone through. He's obviously broke up with his girlfriend Terry as well.
I can't be in this anymore.
Are you breaking up with me because of her?
No, because of you.
If you're wondering why Terry broke up with Donnie as well, she basically couldn't take it that like she was being treated as like this dirty little secret on the side. So yeah, during the stand-up performance he does, he gets a couple chuckles.
You can probably tell my face is a little bruised and battered. So here's a piece of advice. Never give the blowjob if you are the one driving.
it's really well performed because when he makes jokes that don't land, you really feel it hit. It's like, oh, you know, when you get that secondhand embarrassment of like, you know, when a joke doesn't land or, you know, you say something and no one laughs and it's like, oh, I don't like saying the word, but that's cringe.
Here's a little teapot, short and stout. Here is its handle, here is its gout.
But that's not the worst part because Donnie then basically has a full-on mental breakdown on stage going on about everything in his life. You know, the drug taking, him being groomed, him being raped.
I met this trans woman. She's the most beautiful person you've ever met, and I just couldn't love her. It's because I loved one thing in this world more than I did her. Hating myself. I love it. I don't know anything else. God forbid ever taking a chance at happiness.
And he just unloads all of this onto the crowd that weren't expecting this at all. And you would think, believe me, you would think that, you know, in most films when people do this, right, they do the massive oversharing on stage. One person gets up and they start clapping and then everyone else starts clapping going, oh, wow, he opened up about himself. He's such a hero. You know, then everyone starts throwing roses on the stage. No, that doesn't happen because for the most part, this show is incredibly real and grounded. People just find it awkward as fuck, which you would do as well probably in real life, because you have this character that's offloaded all of his trauma that he hasn't really spoke to anyone about. He hasn't had anyone to speak to it about. There's no like buddy side character in the show that you ever see like Donnie kind of open up to. I mean, the closest person he has that's like actually level-headed is his ex-girlfriend, but obviously there's a lot of, you know, hatred that his ex-girlfriend has towards him. Now, despite that, and despite how awkward that just complete trauma dump it was, it does jumpstart his career because someone recorded the stand-up and they posted it to YouTube without him knowing. And then he starts getting calls left and right to come onto shows, come onto podcasts. He gets so caught up in this world that he actually totally forgot about Martha. So this is when Martha starts just, you know, voicemailing him constantly.
I wasn't going to speak to you ever again. Did your parents know about all that in the video, yeah? I cannot express how furious I am.
And again, Donnie's character flaws start to show up because, you know, you'd think, why would you give attention to Martha? You know, like you've got all this this renown now. You know, you're semi-famous. You're being invited onto podcasts. You're probably getting a bit more money than what you used to use. You might even be able to get your own apartment now and not just have to live with your ex-girlfriend's mom, which is something he does in the show. He does actually move out. But despite that, he still becomes obsessed with Martha. Now, Donnie travels all the way back to his parents' house to confess to them about the video because obviously this is opening up about a lot of things and he wants to be able to open up himself in private to his parents without Martha getting involved, because obviously she's someone who's already been obsessively calling his parents' household to try to basically beat him to the punch. So Donnie goes over there and he sits down with his parents, basically says, there's a video. Have you seen it? The parents are like, no, because they're boomers and probably the only thing that they use is Facebook.
No, but I'm not on social media anymore. And your dad.
Isn't a fucking moron.
But he basically explains that he confessed to a lot of things and comes out about his sexuality, saying he doesn't think he's straight anymore. He could basically be bisexual, but he's not even sure himself.
I don't think I'm straight anymore. I think I'm probably, like, bisexual. Maybe it's a journey.
And then he goes on to say how Darian, the guy from a few episodes ago, basically drugged him up and raped him.
I was raped by a man.
Oh my God.
And Donnie's parents instantly sympathize with him. They're people that love their child very, very much. They don't care if he was straight or gay or bi or trans or, you know, whatever. And that's really nice. And the mom obviously bursts into tears immediately because women usually have two emotions, le sad or le angry. But the dad obviously sits there very stoic and you're kind of worried, oh shit, is he actually going to like reject him? That his son's like kind of coming out the closet. But instead, the dad actually opens up to him and says, you know, would you think if I was less of a man, if, you know, someone sexually abused me? And he goes like, no, why?
Would you see me as less of a man?
Well, no.
And then the dad basically just says,
I grew up in the Catholic Church.
Basically implying that when he was a kid, some priest basically, you know, molested him. And it sounds weird explaining it, but it's really nice to see that Donnie and his dad kind of have common ground there. They both have a trauma that they've survived through. And you would think the show would end there, you know, like it's a happy ending. He's opened up to his parents, like the most important people in his life. He's got a little bit of fame now. Maybe he could use that to further his stand-up career. But no, because this is obviously Donnie retelling his series of events with this stalker, and it's brutally honest. So he turns his phone on towards the end, and there are dozens more voicemails from Martha. And again, his obsession with Martha starts all over again. He starts categorizing these voice notes, you know, trying to understand how she works, like what could have gone wrong in her life to be like this. Instead of trying to distance himself away, he just wants to learn more about her and how she works. But like I said earlier, he did go to the police, and that actually becomes a very complicated issue because the police can't actually do anything. You know, Donnie confronts Martha saying, you know, like, leave me the fuck alone, get the fuck out of my life, or, you know, something bad's gonna happen to you.
Leave my fucking family alone. If you leave my family alone, I will hang your curtains tonight. I want to make sure I get it right, though. Put it in an email, what you want to do to me, how you want me to hang them, but I like it rough. So make sure it's as sick, twisted, as depraved as you can write it.
And then he finds out that Martha was actually recording that entire conversation on her phone to use in her own defense against the police.
I want to make sure I get it right, though.
And it's interesting because Donnie's obviously made the claim to the police about what this woman has done to him, but yet the tables are completely turned when she has that voice recording of Donnie threatening her. So then he's the one who's like actually the aggressor now. And then obviously Martha chooses to not press charges because she's just completely obsessed with him.
Miss Scott does not wish to take any action against you.
I know it sounds stupid, but it really does become this like Batman Joker dynamic where they just could not exist without each other.
You complete me.
But eventually Donnie does get a conviction on Martha, and she basically pleads guilty to, you know, harassment charges and stalking.
So you better watch what you're saying, because maybe one day I will stab someone.
Martha was arrested the next day and charged with 3 counts of stalking and harassment.
Between the dates of the 14th of August 2015 and the 22nd of March 2017.
Guilty?
Which is really surprising because I expected this really long drawn out court segment where she's just sat there defending herself over and over, be like, I didn't do anything, it wasn't me, it was him. But no, she completely takes it on the chin. She's aware of what she's done. She just can't help herself, and she pleads guilty. And after her sentencing and after she walks out through the back, that is the last you ever see Martha ever again. There's no plot twist where she comes back, and Donnie even says himself, I'm assuming as Richard Gadd, that's the last time he ever saw Martha.
Martha was sentenced to 9 months in prison, and a 5-year restraining order was issued that same day. In that courtroom was the last time I ever set eyes on her.
Even then, after the conviction, he should be happy he doesn't have this stalker anymore, but he's not. He's insanely depressed. He feels like his entire world is crumbling around him. He's actually just completely on his own with his headphones on, listening to her voice notes over and over, almost looking back on this trauma of harassment as like fond memories. And the way the show ends, which I find really, really interesting, almost like this vicious circle is just repeating itself, is Donnie, obviously madly depressed that Martha's been convicted, goes into a bar, sits down, orders a vodka Coke, but then realizes he doesn't have his wallet, he's left it at home, to which the bartender says,
don't worry about it, it's on me.
Which is exactly what Donnie did to Martha, this act of kindness, which ended up, you know, turning into stalking. Now, I'm not saying that Donnie is going to end up becoming a Martha, just obsessing over this like random bartender that was introduced at the end, but it really is interesting that the show ended from the perspective that Martha was introduced as. Now, like I said, one thing I love about this show is it portrays pretty much all the characters in a very human way. Donnie is the main character, is the protagonist, but still he's an incredibly flawed person and even somewhat selfish. And Martha is the main antagonist. She's this obsessive stalker, but there are moments where you see that she's just a damaged woman, and she's obviously gone through so much trauma that isn't explained in the show, and she feels like she can escape some of that trauma by finding a companion in her life, which she chooses to be Donnie, not really understanding until she sat there in a courtroom that what she's done is just so obsessive. And keep in mind as well, in the show, Martha has actually had previous convictions for stalking, which he actually finds out by just searching her name online. So Donnie is not the first victim that Martha's had. This is obviously a pattern of behavior she's had. She's a damaged person. I think the only exception to that rule is Darian, because Darian is in the show so briefly. He's not really fleshed out, but I don't feel like he needs to be. He is probably the most evil person in the entire show. He has no redeeming qualities. He basically just, you know, tricks and uses Donnie. And if anything, he's basically used as a pillar to show that Donnie is a deeply flawed character that will keep going back to these people that just manipulate and take advantage of him. A good example is Terry, the trans girl that Donnie was dating. She's basically mostly used in the show as this character that Donnie can talk to warn him. Like, Donnie will open up about these situations and Terry will say, get out. Like, why are you still putting yourself in this toxic environment? Get out. It's almost like a surrogate for the audience. You know, the people sat there at home being like, oh, Donnie, don't do it. No, get out of there, bro. And I do also like this show because it sheds light on, you know, men, especially having to deal with violent sexual crimes, harassment, stalking, because that's something that isn't really talked about that much within, you know, the male sphere. Reindeer. It's clear that Richard Gadd, when he made the show, when he portrayed himself as Donnie, he wanted to do like a character study. This isn't a character that you completely feel sympathy for, and the fact that he's a good guy. There are points you do sympathize with him, absolutely. But also, he, like most characters in this show, is someone who is deeply flawed. Now, Richard Gadd, who created the show, he's a 34-year-old Scottish writer. And this show, Baby Reindeer, was basically a huge stepping off point because before Baby Reindeer, pretty much no one knew who he was. He would do like the occasional stage performance and stuff.
I was having a wank the other day, and I enjoyed it very much. But the staff at Tesco didn't.
But getting your own Netflix show, that is hugely different. Now, Baby Reindeer on Netflix isn't actually the first incarnation of this show. It was originally a stage performance created all the way back in 2019. And that stage performance, which was a one-man show, by the way, like he basically just played himself. There were no other actors or anything. That was basically an autobiographical retelling of Richard Gadd over the past 6 years of his life. And when you watch Baby Reindeer on Netflix, it isn't actually apparent, mostly because there's not really any kind of time jumps, or for the stupid people, it doesn't have like, you know, a time at the top saying 4 years later, 3 years later. You know those films where you just see like a sky shot of London and then like the subtitle will say London, England? It's like, really? I actually couldn't tell. When you watch the show, you don't actually realize it's been 6 years until Martha's court hearing, where, you know, they actually say how long Martha has been doing this behavior for. Now, when he originally performed Baby Reindeer, the one-man show in Edinburgh, he basically condensed it into a 1-hour performance about a considerable period of his life. And then in interviews, he mentions how he's not just talking about him, but other people in his life.
Funny as well. So, I mean, it's obviously quite a sinister idea, being stalked and harassed.
Yes.
How do you get the humour into it?
Well, you know, it's funny because I come from a comedy background. I never really wanted to set out to do a comedy show with this because the subject matter is quite tricky, and it's not just about me, it's about someone else, and it's about this sticky, awkward situation. It felt untrue to just make it just funny.
Yeah.
So the humor just comes from like the madness of the situation, the sort of the craziness of how sometimes as it was happening to me, I would think, how is this happening to me? How has it got to this level?
And even from a comedy background, you know, he doesn't want to make fun of people that he spoke about directly. Instead, he wants to focus on the semi-dark humor of, you know, the entire situation, which I found really interesting. You know, he's kind of bordering this line. He doesn't want to make it like a laugh out loud Will Ferrell XD Lamau comedy, but he doesn't want it to be something incredibly dark and gritty and basically just trauma dumping, which he did on the stage all those years ago. He's bordering something, which is, you know, incredibly interesting and probably a brand new take on it. There are loads of interviews of Richard talking about this, and I really do suggest you look them up online because it is insane, like how candid he is around all of it. You can really tell that he really, really does care about this project that he's developed. You know, Baby Reindeer was basically, you know, his pet project because he's basically turning his trauma into art, and thankfully it's been incredibly successful and profitable for him. Now, one part of Baby Reindeer I can't ignore, and again, the entire reason I made this video is because people watched Baby Reindeer and they did exactly what Richard Gadd, the creator, said not to do. It really is crazy. Like when I was scrolling through TikTok, you just had like so many middle-aged women and they were like, guys, we found the real Martha. We found what she looks like, guys. Now, this is a bit of a difficult one to argue about because Richard has said multiple times, do not try to find these people. That is not the point. I'm not here to name and shame them. Hence why he casts pretty much all of them in a sympathetic light. You know, for example, Martha, the stalker, she's not an evil woman. She's just deeply troubled. But obviously that did not stop TikTok Zoomers with way too much spare time on their hands to instantly track down these people. And funnily enough, actually get a lot of them wrong, accusing completely innocent people of rape. So, like I said, this is Richard Gadd's pet project, and one thing he chose to do for Baby Reindeer was cast people that had the same likeness to the people involved in his life. And when I say that, I basically mean Martha, the woman who was actually stalking Richard throughout, you know, his younger years, probably looks a little bit like Martha's actress. He's definitely done that on purpose, you know, almost like kind of to relive his own trauma when watching the show or creating the show, just so he can kind of get it out of his system. And a lot of people have used that as a counterpoint against Richard, basically saying, well, if you didn't want us to find these people, why did you cast people that look like them? But again, whether you agree with that or not, I think if you're purposely trying to track down and stalk the people that were involved in this show, it really does show that you have missed the entire point of Baby Reindeer. One situation in particular that is really, really sad, obviously a lot of people wanted to find the identity of Darian. They didn't care about Martha because the show did a very good job trying to basically show that she's a deeply troubled, ill woman. They wanted to go after Darian because Darian, from what, you know, brief screen time he has in the show, seems to be this just absolute scumbag, degenerate monster. So people started to draw comparisons from Darian to Sean Foley, who's a director at the Birmingham Rep. Now, this is a guy that actually recently stood down from his job before Baby Reindeer, and people basically drew conclusions saying, oh, he stepped down. He knew Baby Reindeer was coming out. And you had loads of people on TikTok basically passing judgment by saying, oh, they look the same and they did the same job. That's it. That's all we need. This is actually an Insta story that Richard put out. Hi, everyone. People I love, have worked with and admire, including Sean Foley, are unfairly getting caught up in speculation. Please don't speculate on who any of the real life people could be. That's not the point of our show. Lots of love, Richard. Now, I do sympathize with Richard here because it's basically the equivalent of putting at the start of a YouTube expose video, do not harass or attack anyone mentioned in the video. Like basically, you're just putting that in to cover your own ass because you know it doesn't work. Unfortunately, people are going to finish the show, and that morbid curiosity of, you know, ooh, who are these people? What do they look like in real life? Where are they now? So I can go harass them. There were other people in the show as well, like for example, the trans girlfriend Terry. People went onto Richard's Instagram, basically stalked his profile, went onto his followers to basically find anyone that looked somewhat similar to Terry, because he's admitted himself that he's cast people with the same likability to people in his life. And looking over it, it's kind of sad. It just shows like there is no media literacy out there. The fact that you'll watch this show, be so absorbed in it to the point that you feel like you're now a Reddit detective. But on the other hand, I do understand that people watch this show, they do empathize with Richard's character, Donnie, and they almost feel like they have to take justice into their own hands, like vigilantism. I think people need to respect that this is his trauma, and he's turned his trauma into art. And if he's cast people that look similar to the people that were in his life, who cares? Like, he's allowed to do that. That then doesn't give you like a warrant card to go around like stalking his Instagram. Now, I've left Martha until last because like I'll be honest, like internet detectives, they are complete idiots, because basically they started going around and finding like any like overweight middle-aged woman and being like, that's Martha, we did it, Reddit. They actually found one woman that seemed to add up to be Martha, especially with the fact that she was like, you know, putting Facebook posts out like 5 times a minute. But then she came out with this incredibly lengthy post basically detailing how she has no idea who Richard is. Baby Reindeer was Gad's last desperate shot. Pathetic. Be careful what you wish for. I don't want to be famous. They're the failed comedian Gad who gags on balls. Please comment. Do comment. Harass me. Pretty please. Gad thus is the worst type of revenge. You could have married a trans, been happy. No, you didn't want to be remembered for fantasizing about a woman you obsessed with and never had sex with me. We sad man. Now, if you look at these Facebook screenshots, you can see that there is a huge amount of similarities, especially with the typing style, because Martha was someone who had absolutely horrendous spelling. Now, she even came out actually talking about how she has plans to basically sue Netflix for defamation. And it sucks because Richard obviously went through insane hoops to keep this woman's identity away from public light. Yes, he did cast a woman who looks similar to her on purpose, but again, it's not like he isn't allowed to do that. Now, obviously, by looking at the post, it's really obvious that she has, you know, some kind of mental illness and she's being incredibly reactionary. But also, it really doesn't help that she's got all these like Facebook warriors now going onto her page, basically harassing her because she was in Baby Reindeer. Because the entire point of that show was to show that she was a stalker, but her herself was incredibly mentally damaged. And at the end, she got convicted. She served her time. She doesn't now need to be harassed until the end of time. I'm saying that as well because these are Facebook warriors, which exclusively are 30 to 40-year-old women that I do not have an argument with them, especially after they've had a glass of wine. Jesus Christ. One thing they do focus on the show a lot as well, which I really like, is Richard's, you know, sexuality, because he feels that he's straight. You know, in the beginning of the show, his ex-girlfriend is a woman, but then later on in the show, he's dating Terry, who is a trans woman, and he almost feels disgusted with himself dating someone who's trans. And then after the experience he had with Darian, where he was basically raped, that threw his sexuality into complete spiral. Because as much as the focus is on Martha and her being a stalker, the main focus of the show really is Donnie. Like who is he? What is he like? And it seems now, even after the show has concluded, Richard isn't 100% sure.
Gad has since shared that Terry is based on a real trans woman he was seeing at the time. Gad identifies as bisexual, but has said that his sexuality is still a journey. He told Attitude, I feel like I'm constantly in a state of flux with my sexuality. It's almost like a restlessness, but maybe that's what bisexuality is.
But overall, I think Baby Reindeer is an amazing show, and you should definitely watch it because, like I said at the beginning, Netflix puts out an insane amount of slop, but occasionally there is a diamond. There is a little diamond in the slop. And if you think I'm going to talk about Rebel Moon, I'm not. I'm definitely not. That show looks absolutely mid. I watched part 1 and then turned it off after 10 minutes. Put me to bed. But Baby Reindeer is definitely worth watching. The script is insane. The cinematography is very good as well, especially the episode with Darian inside the apartment. You can really see there's a lot of close-ups. It's very visceral. It almost looks like something from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. like with all these like, you know, close-ups of like sweaty faces and stuff. It's very, very uncomfortable. And obviously the biggest takeaway from the show is Richard did not want Martha, his stalker, to be portrayed as a villain. This wasn't some big expose hit piece. This was someone talking about years of trauma they've had in their life and how they came to terms with it. And like I've said multiple times, Martha is portrayed as an incredibly broken character. Like, she has obviously gone through her own kind of traumatic experiences and unfortunately can only find solace by bonding with other people, whether they like it or not. And one thing I really like about the show is it never explains why Martha's like this. Like I said, we get the flashback episode halfway through with Donnie and Darian, but we never get a flashback episode with Martha. You know, you don't see her as like a child blowing out a birthday cake and she's got like an abusive uncle or something. Like none of that ever happens. You just have to put the pieces together yourself and theorize what made her like this. But even then, that isn't really the focus. The focus is Donnie as a character surviving day to day, trying to get his boots off the ground as someone in stand-up comedy, while also being an incredibly broken person himself, to the point that he lets incredibly dangerous, damaging people into his life because he feels like his life is boring otherwise. Like I said, even at the end, once there's been a conviction, you know, once Martha is put away in jail, he's still obsessively listening to her voice notes. He cannot let go of her, and he almost feels like the justice he got with her being put away in jail is like it's world destroying because he doesn't have her anymore. He himself is almost turned into the stalker. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I like doing these kind of like reviews on like films and stuff that aren't really good enough for the main channel. I do enjoy Baby Reindeer, and hopefully this video undoes the damage of the Fallout review. It probably won't. Go away!